Hello, my name is Roy Poyan, and I am the Director of Families Impacted by Opioids. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Fentanyl and the Families in Harm's Way. What we're going to discuss today is a topic that, percentage-wise, you won't have to deal with, but there is that possibility you will. Also, it may be that you'll have to deal with it only in an extended way. It may be somebody else's experience, and you will have better knowledge of how to help them with what they're dealing with. The topic is bereavement. So at this point, successful lifelong recovery was not achieved, and the person that you care for has passed. Now is the remainder of your life, and there are a sundry of different programs that are available, more than likely in your community, that you can tap into for what is termed as the grieving process. And we know that for the Kohler-Hass scale, that there is a certain set of what will happen in terms of grieving, where we're kind of in denial that it happened, and then we're angry, and it's very disruptive, and we're storming, and then we move into more of an acceptance over time. And a lot of people ask, how long is this going to take? And the answer is, it's hard to say. It's you. It's your bereavement. It could take years. It could take months. But it does progress, and over time, it does change. Now, what you're going to learn in this bereavement review is more kind of academic and not the spiritual side. And what we're going to also identify is that there's a medical part of grieving, and that's where grieving turns into more of a complex, almost traumatic experience, where your grieving really requires the care of a professional therapist. It may even require some medication. But those are very not common occurrences. So just be aware that if you're saying, well, this is taking too long, the question is more, what's the intensity of it? And we'll show you that as we start to discuss the different areas of bereavement. But it's not just your bereavement and grieving that we're also reviewing. It may be that somebody that you care about has experienced this situation in their life. And when you're aware of what this is for yourself, having not necessarily gone through it, but you're aware of it, you'll be able to offer better advice. You'll be a better companion for them. So do it for yourself and do it for others around you. But let's gather around the family table and take a look and break this down so that we do understand it more thoroughly. And it is a part of our ability to be kind and loving to ourselves, with an understanding of what these possibility feelings mean, and also to others that we might share this with.
This is a difficult topic to talk about, bereavement, because we would only really be talking about it if somebody has passed or somebody else that we know, their loved one has passed, and we're talking with them. So let's be assured that these are kind of like, these are sacred topics in terms of, we will always remember how we addressed the time when we were experiencing our bereavement. And the one things that really gets pointed out most often about bereavement is that it's on its own timeline. It's probably one of the more difficult aspects to accept. It's called grief, and you can look it up. They've got great videos for us to kind of grow through. There's no real one way that preparing yourself for grief is going to be like effective. You could take this episode and make it part of your understanding, and that'll be healthy for you. But the most constructive advice that we can give to all of us is that when dealing with grief, allow yourself to experience it. And somebody would say, that's not what I want to do, especially when they're in it. This is not something that I want to spend time living inside of, and I want it to pass as soon as possible. It is so painful. And I think what's important, without using colloquials, is for us to understand that time is its own best medicine. And I don't know that I'm aware enough to help us all understand why that is, why time is your best medicine. But I think that it's of value for us to understand that it is, and just leave it at that. Know that you will eventually find a place where your thoughts will change. It doesn't mean your love changes. It doesn't mean that the value that you gave this person and the meaning of their loss here with everybody has been diminished by the fact that you're not thinking as often about it. But it is healthy in its same way. So as you start to see yourself not thinking about it as much, don't feel guilty about that. That's a part of the way that this timeline works, and it's good. It's good for them because it shows that you cared enough that you would go back and allow yourself to then kind of regain, your life with the memory of them. So that's kind of respectful in your sense of who they were while they were here and who they are now that they're not here, but still here with us in our memories and our love and in our hearts. So when we start to look at the topic kind of from a clinical perspective, we're looking at grief. And in the study guide, I don't mean to make academics out of this, but in the study guide, there is a value in knowing what has been clinically researched about grief, and they have kind of taken it apart and identified certain characteristics of, so what does grief really mean to us, and kind of how does it play a role in our life, because dying does happen and we more than likely will experience it. So what will we be experiencing? Well, it's very likely that you'll experience intense sadness. Not just, you're sad about it, but intense sadness. Crying is very much a part of this, and it's okay, go ahead and cry. It's good for you, it's healthy. Other unfamiliar emotions could come through. And then preoccupation of thoughts and memories about the person that's deceased. You might sit there and think, I just find myself thinking about him so much. That's okay. That's a part of this timeline process. And you want to allow yourself to experience that. Difficulty in concentrating. I just can't concentrate on anything now. That'll pass, okay? Just know that that'll pass. But for right now, be understanding to yourself and say, I'm allowed to feel this way. And be a limited concentration is a part of that. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that, we understand that the grieving process kind of comes in parts, and we'll go to the workbook to take a closer look at where those parts are. It may be that you'll use the workbook during grief, but reviewing it now before grief happens is pretty healthy, actually. What's important is that we identify that with grief, there's regular grief, and then there's what you might call complicated grief. And so you might sit there and say, Roy, how long should grief last? Well, once again, unfortunately, and you hear this all the time, and it's almost like they're avoiding answering you, they just don't know. It depends on the person and how they're handling their grief and grief process. So we do know that as they start to take a look at grief, there is major depression. Well, that's a little bit different than just, regular grief. So if we find that we are in major depression, that because it's a major word, That actually has a diagnostic to it, which has a certain criteria to it, which means it can be diagnosed and assessed, and a plan of treatment can be provided. Okay, I would not recommend that you allow a doctor to say, "We're going to give you some antidepressants and good luck." That's not healthy. That's not healthy anytime. The antidepressants are used to settle your mind so that you can get cognitive behavioral therapy to help you adjust what's going on. The antidepressants by themselves don't make anything go away. If that cognitive thinking is still there, then it'll be done, when you come off the drug too. So hopefully that makes sense. But what we don't want to do is just to throw medication at the fact that you're grieving and it's because you're depressed. Be more understanding of what the term major depression in complicated grief means. Have a known course of action. Include family therapy, not with the person that's writing the drug. So don't see your psychiatrist or your primary care and expect that they're going to give you both the drug and the counseling. Put the two in two different places so that one can counter the other and one can complement the other. I hope that's helpful. So when we're starting to look at these different aspects, we've got a whole list of references in the study guide. And more than any other chapter, it goes on for like 3 or 4 pages in terms of references. We've done that on purpose because when it comes to grieving, this is something that you're going to have to read and study on. It would be great if we could sit there and say, listen, this is bereavement, and this is what you're going to go through. And if you do this, that, if this happens, go to kind of an if, then, go to flow chart. There is no such flow chart because it's your personal experience. You can read up on the topic of grief. There is anticipatory grief also, and that's when often seen in things like Alzheimer's or cancer, where you know that the person has a final point of terminal illness, and you're starting to experience that loss ahead of the time that it happened. If you find yourself thinking that way, get a family therapist on board and talk with them. That's something that you would want to address. You'd want to be honest with yourself. I'm having these tendencies of thinking that he's going to die or she's going to die, and what it's going to be like without them here. Well, I think that that's somewhat reasonable for you to feel that way. It's definitely not healthy, and it's not going to help you to deal with it. So for that same purpose, you'd want to get kind of an assessment of what's exactly taking place and how you might be able to manage it better. In terms of the actual grieving process, we're looking at about 5 different phases. If it was a curve, it would go down because your emotions go down, and then it would come up because your emotions come back up. And the timeline that it takes to do that is where we come back to that topic. Well, it depends on the timeline, and that timeline is yours. But in the very beginning, it's considered to be denial. And you might find yourself saying, I can't believe this is happening. It shouldn't have happened. They didn't realize there was fentanyl in that. I just don't want to accept the fact that this is happening. And that's reasonable, by the way. All of these are reasonable, and that's why we're telling you in advance. You're going to go through this cycle, and each stage, you want to experience because it means you're progressing to that stage and then to the next stage. The next one is anger, and you would be angry, especially in an overdose situation. It seems so unfair that that society allowed this to be in our communities, and that we seem to be so accepting these days of the drug epidemic, almost as though it's cancer, and we built all these institutions, and it's okay that cancer takes place, we don't have to solve it. Well, we should solve the drug epidemic. Well, unfortunately, that's going to take a lot. And for right now, if you're dealing with bereavement, you've been the end result of everything that's bad about, when this was, an element of a molecule of a chemical that's being mixed to then be shipped and delivered to your loved one and put into their body. I mean, this This is wrong in every which way, and you have every right to be angry about it. So go ahead and experience that anger. Then you're going to get into bargaining. Well, if they didn't do this, then they wouldn't have done that, and this wouldn't have happened. And that's definitely a part of the cycle and bargaining. Okay, maybe I wish this had happened to me and not them. You know, types of, you know, like they're poker chips that you're putting into the game. The fact is, there really isn't any bargaining your way out of this, but it is something that you're going to experience. So allow yourself to do it once again. Then that bargaining turns into depression, which is very common. And that depression might be mild, it might be moderate, it might be severe. Remember, it's a disease, it has a category, it has a staging, mild, moderate, severe, and there's a plan of treatment that can be put into place to assist you with depression. But don't be surprised if depression is a part of your cycle, because it is a part of the cycle. Go ahead and experience it. It's okay. You're okay. You'll get through this. It'll just take time. Unfortunately, that phrase comes back and back and back because it's so true. And you'll realize that when you get on the other side of this. Boy, it was tough going through the bereavement. But I'm through it now. And, you know, I'm better. And so I'm moving on, you know, without guilt of moving on. And that's where you are when you're in acceptance, which is the final of the 5 stages. And so now you've basically gone through what the clinicians have identified as being the grieving process. The question is, was it a regular, kind of like a complicated, or was it a major depression experience, in which case maybe pharmaceuticals was, you know, introduced during that time frame to help you move through some of the cognitive ways of understanding what you're experiencing, making it yours, but not necessarily owning it. Don't try and be an expert on this with somebody else. If somebody else has experienced and are in bereavement, the best thing we can do is just to be there at a time when they want us there. Making ourselves available is the greatest act of love that you can give somebody. And sometimes just sitting in the room and not saying anything is the best thing not to say. So if you find periods, long periods of quietness, don't assume that nothing's happening. That quietness in itself could speak volumes more than what it might be if you were trying to fill up the time with chitter chatter. Most often when we're experiencing bereavement, we just need time to experience it. And in several areas, we don't want to be alone. And when we invite somebody in to experience the quietness of our living out bereavement in our lives, that's when it's the most sacred. And that's when we've actually got the opportunity to share what most would call a blessing. So your understanding of yourself and your acceptance of the process of bereavement is actually an opportunity of growth. And I'm so sorry if this is the case for you. I do want to put in a footnote at this time. Most people do not die of drug addiction or alcoholism. An incredible vast majority of people do not die of this. It's only a small portion. The reason that it looks big is because the user, the universal population of those using is so huge that when we look at the number of those that have died, we think, wow, that's a lot of people. It is a lot of people. It's terrible that it's happened. It's so unfortunate. But the whole population of those that are using that haven't died is much, much larger. And they will more than likely successfully at some point in their life obtain successful lifelong recovery. So just because your person that you care about is using drugs or alcoholism, experiencing alcoholism, don't think that that's a death certificate. It's absolutely not. But be understanding when somebody else is experiencing bereavement or when you are experiencing bereavement, that this is also a part of the life experience. I want to say God bless you in your journey. It's not an easy one by any stretch of the imagination. But if you are the one that's going through this, then just know that you're not going through it alone. That a lot of us have gone through it with you. Although we weren't in your life, we still went through it the same. And that when you take time to understand what might happen next, you're actually showing that you care about your life and the life of others. God bless you. Hello. I want to thank you for continuing to view our episode. And we're now going to work into the area of the 3Ds. This is an important characteristic for the family to develop skills in. And we'll start by taking the time to look at an issue and then determine the issues based on the area of determining a solution, developing a decision, and designing a plan of action. By using your Module 3 workbook and going to a specific issue, you'll be able to find that the first step in that 3D skill set is the FTR, the Family Transformational Model. And the Family Transformational Model is a set-up way, each time the same way, that we will take 5 categories to look at in determining a solution. And each category is going to have 3 questions. So let's get started. The first is to define the issue. Naturally, we'll want to know what the issue is. The word issue is really problem, but we're saying the word issue is, the reason we're saying the word issue is it's just a little bit easier to digest, because it's not always a problem. Sometimes it's just something that's happening, and we need to determine a solution to it. The next question is, how does the issue impact the family? We need to know that. We need to know, we have an issue, that's fine. The issues can exist, but if it's impacting the family, in what way is it impacting the family? And then what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? That's very important for us to know. The fact is that this issue exists and it's impacting the family. We tend to believe maybe there was something we could have done to kind of get ready for it. And if there was, then we would want to have taken those steps, which is what all these episodes are about. And then who can help assist us and the family in our response? So we want to start to ask ourselves, we know that there's an issue, we know that it's impacting the family, and there are things that we could do to prepare for this, but we're probably going to need a resource, information, another person outside of our family, or maybe one of our family members specifically can use their functionality and contribute. So we want to identify that. And then what should the family expect as their outcome? And kind of a start with the end in mind thought, where we're saying, if we're going to do something, it's going to result in something. So is that result desirable? Is that really what we want? Because if we're going to create a solution, then we want the solution's outcome to be what we expect it would be. So in each of these categories that I just described, 1 through 5, there are 3 questions, and we're going to ask ourselves each of these. Let's go back into the first category, define the issue. Clearly state what happened or what will happen. We want to know very clearly what happened or what's likely to happen. And then write that down. Identify who's involved or who should be involved. And then what would you like to have happen or like to see happen? The third question in every category is going to be used. You'll see how in just a minute. But just remember, the third question in every category, so this question right here, the way you answer it, will be reused. Now the next question is, how is the issue impacting the family? Who in the family exactly is impacted? In what way are they impacted? And then the third question is, what is needed to move forward? And then the third category is, what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? The three questions again. What needs to be done? And then prioritize that list. Who needs to be involved? And then what will it look like, the third question, what will it look like when completed? Then the fourth category is, who can help and assist the family in their response? The three questions are, how to search and organize this organization to help you. In other words, it's not enough that you know you're going to go and introduce yourselves to a treatment center in your community. You want to start to determine, how do I look for them and organize my way of seeking help, because it might not just be that group alone. You may also need other services to kind of start to create a who can assist us. And it may be many different types of people. What to ask from them, and then what to expect. Remember the third question, what to expect. And then the fifth category is, what should the family expect as their outcome? Well, that has to do a lot with timing. And if it takes a certain amount of time, let's be realistic of what that is. That has something to do with the expense of the involvement, of getting involved in this issue. And then the third question being, required changes, our changes as family members, for this response to successfully take place. Now, let's state what our solution is. Hey, this is the great news. You've already developed your solution. By answering each of these three questions, the third question in every category, you'll pull forward now into your statement. So your first sentence of your statement is the third answer in the first category. What would you like to have happen or like to see happen? Well, that becomes your first sentence. So what your first sentence for your solution statement is, what we would like to see happen is, and you just pull your answer from there to here. Do the same thing with the second category. How does the issue impact the family? Using the third question's answer, what is needed for the family to move forward? So now your second sentence is, what's needed to move forward is. And now you're accumulating these answers from these categories, the third question, and it's actually becoming your first sentence, your second sentence, your third sentence, your fourth sentence, and your fifth sentence in your solution statement. So your solution statement is going to sound something like, what we would like to see happen is, and what's needed to move forward will be, and then the third question from the third category, what it will look like when completed will be, and then what we expect will be, and then what's required for us to have a successful response is. Now those are your 5 sentences. You've just constructed your solution. And this is how you go about using a model for creating a solution. For any issue in life you have to face, you can use this as a way of approaching it. Now let's go to the other area, which is the second coping skill, making a decision. Let's make a value-based decision. Let's make a decision each time that kind of balances with what we value most. So first we want to determine, what are our values? Well, the best way to do that is to write down on a piece of paper, what types of things do you as an individual value most? And each member of your family can do this in a kind of a group exercise. And then once you've done that, I value love, I value honesty, I value relationships and sharing. These could all be an individual's 1, 2, 3. Then prioritize them. Which of the 1, 2, 3 is most important? Then have each member of the family do the same thing. And then you can sit there and say to the family, what was your number 1? What was your number 2? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? And then what was your 2? What was your 2? What was your 3? What was your 3? And where you start to see many people in the family say, well, my number 1 is relationships, my number 2 was trust, and my number 3 was love. Well, then you talk to another person, they say, well, my number 1 was love, my number 2 was personal expression or confidentiality, or so they mentioned something different, but they did mention love. And then the third member of the family happens to mention love also. You know now that love is a value of the family. So whatever decision you make, you want to balance it on the fact of, does this disrupt our values? If it does, at least you know that it does, and to what degree. You're calculating that. But at least also you're including, what do we value most? Let's make sure our decisions don't counter that. And now, in the first step, we're going to identify exactly what's happened. And this is, by the way, in your book, okay? And it is for each of the episodes. Now, identify exactly what's happened, what happened, how did it happen, who did it happen to. Then the second step is analyze the situation, assess the problem, identify the problem, and in what areas did the problem create an impact. You're writing all of these down. The third step of that the third step in the decision-making model is, what is the number of one contributing factor? What is causing this issue to take place? You need to know that before you make a decision. The fourth step is, now that you know the number one factor, you need to go out and find out what information there is about this. Your primary source, you're going to go to the actual person or organization that's involved with this and ask them, what is this issue, and help us to understand it better. The secondary source would be, somebody's telling you this happened, or somebody suggests that you should do something a certain way, and it's coming from somebody else other than the primary source. It could be an article, a clinical paper. These are all secondary sources, and you gather them and you make them part of your primary, secondary information gathering. The third area that you look at is your gut. What does your gut, because that's often where our faith comes in, and other things that are very important when making decisions get included. So trust your gut is what we're saying in the decision-making process. The fifth step in making a good quality decision is where you're taking a criteria and saying, let's take what we're going to make a decision about and let's balance it on the criteria to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. And this will ensure safety of your loved one. Is safety a part of what's being considered? And do we have the resources that are needed to do the decision we're looking at? And then, do we understand the timetable? Is it realistic? And do we understand the negative impacts? Because every decision has a positive and negative. Well, identify what the negative outcomes might be so that you can weight the factor of, is this a good decision? And then, would you do this if, would you ask others to do this if they were doing it for you? Meaning it was done for you or to you. Is this still a good decision? These are all areas that you want to take a look at. The third coping skill is in the area of the family plan of action. And everybody could say, well, Roy, listen, we're just going to go out and do it. Well, it's going to get done a lot more effectively. I want to warn you that the addiction industry is not organized. And then again, either is the family. So you're taking two disorganized organizations and you're putting them together. So a plan is a very good idea. The other factor is, you're going to more than likely require the assistance of a lot of different groups. And as time goes by, those groups are going to change. And now it's a whole new set of groups that you're dealing with. When you're at the hospital, the ER, that's what that is. Then you move over to detox, that's what that is. Then you move over to therapy and treatment, and that lasts for 16 weeks. That's what that is. Then you're looking at sober living, recovery, maybe incarceration and then reentry, on all that's involved in that. So there's all sorts of reasons why a plan put on paper based on the decision and the information gathering that you've made, based on the solution that you know you want to use, are very good ideas. It all comes together with the plan of action. Then you take the plan of action and you go find a professional to help you. Everything that we've done up to now is to position you to a place where you can be properly assisted and directed and supported. This is what's often missing in the families. This is what exhausts the families. This is where the families get into fights internally on. So, for that reason, we're going to apply the 3D coping skills. Determine a solution. We're going to develop a decision, and we're going to design a plan of action. And we're going to do it each time. I hope this is helpful for you. I'm confident it will be.